Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And my computer is playing up. My mouse is being all over the place, won't do what it wants to do. But anyway, 80 years ago, a series of iconic photos were taken on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima. Today, we are going to learn about eight Texan school friends who enlisted in the Marine Corps, one of whom was part of the flag raising. Welcome to World War II, Andrew. Now, come on, mouse, work properly. There we go. Come on, mouse. Come on. There we go. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Hey, good, Paul. Thank you so much for having me today.
So before we start with the presentation, how would you like to define yourself? Military historian, researcher, Texan historian, family historian? What terms do you like?
So first off, I'm not a Texan. I actually grew up in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan on a 7-generation family farm. And I would probably say my best is military researcher, historian. I've been blessed that my family are big historians, and we've had a Booher. My last name's Booher. We've had a Booher in every major conflict America's ever fought in. So it's been kind of one of my favorite things to do. So
cool. Well, folks, it may mean that I can't put up your questions on screen because I just can't. My mouse is only working if I hit it 10 times. So I'm basically going to hand over to Andrew to take us through this presentation. If I can bring up the PowerPoint, come on, mouse, work. There we go. So I'm going to hand over to you, Andrew, to go through this. I will jump in with a few comments, but I'm just glad we're here. So and apologies that my computer tech is being weird. But over to you, Andrew.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you, Paul, for having me. Anybody that's a fan of World War II history, I'm sure knows about your show. You've had some great historians on here, and I'm just honored to be a part of this. Our show today is we're going to focus on 8 high school football teammates who during World War II enlisted in the Marine Corps together. And then one of them, as you mentioned, happened to be pictured in one of the most famous photos taken during the Second World War. And so before I begin, Weslaco, Texas is located at the southern tip, almost on the Mexican border. I do not have a picture of that, like a map. I had it in here, but file was a little larger than expected. But it's located in what is called the Valley of Texas. In 1940, there was about 6,800 citizens living in Weslaco, and the town was founded in 1919. So by the time of World War II, the town was barely 20 years old. So anyway, we'll dive in here. Just a brief introduction on the Weslaco Eight, as they'd later be known. We'll start off with Pete Hall. He was the oldest of the Weslaco Eight and was a grade ahead of the rest of the 7. So 7 of those 8 guys were in the same graduating class, while this guy here was a class ahead of him. They all grew up together, and the year previous, they all 8 were on the same football team, and Pete was a year ahead of them, and he was their co-captain. So he was a very good offensive lineman, and I'm not sure how you or the viewers are with American football, but
well, the Americans will get it, and the Brits don't care.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so he was an offensive tackle and co-captain on the team. And then we'll dive into the 7 seniors for this. We've got Leo Ryan. He was the oldest of 7 sons, born in Indiana, Oklahoma, moved to Weslaco as an infant, and then, grew up there. His father was an insurance broker. And then the one that we'll be mentioning a lot today, Harlon Block, he was the 3rd of 6 children. He was born in Yorktown, Texas, DeWitt County. And I've had the pleasure of meeting some relatives of all 8, researching for this eventual book that I'm going to do. I reached out to the 8 families, and 5 of them were very helpful with this. So I owe a lot of this credit to them. But Block family lore was it that they brought their children north to to be born and whatnot. And then they eventually moved back to Weslaco, the McAllen-Weslaco area when Harlon was born. His family, if you've read Flags Our Fathers by James Bradley, you will note that Harlon's mother, who will play a key role in this as well, was a Seventh-day Adventist, very strict, and did not want her son or any of her kids to, rebel or whatnot. And by the time they all attended a Seventh-day Adventist school, and by the time he was a sophomore, he got expelled. For my research, it was through like an obscenity that had been written on the school grounds. And so he transferred to Weslaco High School as a junior, where he ended up playing football that year as well. And then another guy that we'll be talking about a lot too is James Glenn Kleckler. Much to his chagrin, he was known as Doc throughout his life. But he grew up on a farm, as did Harlon. And moved to the Valley as a kid. And then we've got Henry Sims, also known, his middle name is Carl Sims, and he went by Carl Sims throughout his life. And one thing about Carl was he didn't play football in the years previous. He came on as a senior, and very talented in the arts. From what I've researched and been told, he was part of the high school band, high school choir. And by the time of his senior year, the football coach was like, man, this young man is a really good athlete. Let's get him on the football team. And sure enough, he had a really good season. Leo Leduc. Leo's family was one of the founders of the town, or one of the primary settlers in Weslaco. And he was the vice president of his class and also got voted most handsomest in his senior class. So a very well-recognized student among his peers. And then we got Robert Suter. He was another good athlete, had the school record in one of the track events his junior year. And one thing to note of him, and if you can tell by his date of birth, he was one of two sons, and his older brother was killed on the USS Arizona on December 7th, 1941, the day after Bob's birthday, which is unfortunate. And then finally, the youngest of the Weslaco Eight, Benjamin Guest Jr., who was known as BR. And he grew up on a farm, as most of them did, and was a 3-year varsity football player, which in America for high school, varsity football, most of the time it's a 2-year sport, and he was good enough to play 3 years and a very good athlete. And so we'll dive in to the important stuff here. The 1942 fall, 7 of these guys are pictured in here. Of note, Harlon Block and Glenn Kleckler are in the back row, 3rd and 4th from the left. And they were coming off of a losing season. They actually got beat pretty bad by a future Dallas Cowboy head coach, Tom Landry, in one of the games. And so they were coming in with a bunch of talent, thinking that, they were going to do a lot better than the year before. And this was their starting lineup going into the season. Just a brief mention on where the 8 are. Leo Ryan is right end on the right-hand side. His brother Kenneth, who was a year below him, was on the left side. Bob Suter and Leo Leduc are on the offensive line. And then the backfield was the rest of the 7 of the senior class, specifically Harlon Block at fullback there. And they had a winning season. If you'll note in this results from the game, they had 7 shutouts, so their defense was really good. And BR Guess, their quarterback, actually led the Valley in scoring touchdowns. And he scored 17 rushing touchdowns, which was the school record at the time. And so they had a lot of awards given to him at the end of the year. And going into the winter of 1942-43, a lot of them had the goal of playing college football. However, the war had been going on for a year, and by December of 1942, they all had signed up for the draft.
Just a quick question for you, Andrew, because
absolutely,
well, we did the show with Lisa a week ago now about alcohol in World War II and how social attitudes obviously changed all sorts of things in the time of conflict. And being a Brit, there were discussions in Britain about whether football, and I mean professional football and amateur football, should continue or whether it should stop. And kind of what was the general mood in a state as sort of as patriotic as Texas about something like football? Was it an essential part of trying to keep life going on despite the fact there's war going overseas, or was there any kind of opposition to it from people saying we shouldn't be focusing on sports when the world is killing each other? What was the sort of what's the climate, so to speak?
Absolutely. So by all the accounts that I've found, and I want to thank the Weslaco Museum for answering my endless questions as well. They've been a great resource. But I think that it was a necessity, especially down in Texas. Football was a main source of hobby for the citizens down there. And the picture's kind of blurry on here, but if you can tell, this was taken from one of the games, and you can see the fans are just piled in at the game. And the years during World War II, high school football continued. A lot of these guys had brothers that played, like especially 44, 45. And so my research suggests that it was a necessity, and it kept the fans and citizens' minds off of the war.
Yeah, and ultimately, there's nothing wrong with promoting teamwork. I mean, for whatever's going to happen later on, these essential skills of working together and physical fitness, they're not going to be ignored in a situation when there's war. So yeah, brilliant stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then so going into January 1943, they knew the war was coming, and so through my research, I've had the pleasure of going through the National Museum of the Pacific War down in Fredericksburg, Texas. They've conducted a lot of interviews with veterans and whatnot from the Pacific Theater. And Glenn Kleckler was interviewed quite a bit in his later life. And he was the one that evidently told the story of what happened here in the next few slides. But in January 1943, I've tried to find the date that it occurred on, but he mentioned that it was the first warm day in Weslaco of the new year, and they were all standing outside waiting for the lunch bell to ring to go back to school. And Harlon Block had come up to Glenn Kleckler and said, "Hey, why don't we skip school today? The weather's nice. I've got my dad's truck." Because brief mention, Harlon Block's family hauled crude oil. That was their main occupation. So Harlon was working for his dad, and he had evidently had his truck, and he said, "Let's skip school today." And his buddy was going for an attendance award because Kleckler's brother had received it a few years before. And he wanted that award too, to keep it in the family, I'm guessing. And eventually he committed to going with his buddy to skip school, and joined with him was Carl Sims. And as we mentioned before, the backfield, those three will come at the end here. I want you to remember Sims, Block, and Kleckler because their story connects again here in a little bit. But those three ended up skipping school together and went to Weslaco Movie Theater. And before they got out of the vehicle, they're like, "Well, Kleckler's like, we can't go here because the manager of the theater knows Weslaco football. And if we get caught, we're going to get a whipping by the principal." And so they traversed throughout South Texas, ultimately ending up in Harlingen, where they attended the Arcadia Theater. And the movie has since been lost to history, but through my research, I believe it was a Clark Gable film called Somewhere I Will Find You, is the one that they saw. But they went and watched the movie, and then after the film, they know they're going to get caught, so they're like, "What can we do to cover ourselves?" So they're walking down the street, and what do they see? They see the fancy Marine Corps recruiting sign in front of a recruiting office, and they go in and get some information. But as Kleckler would mention later, they weren't allowed to sign anything because they were still students in high school. And so they ended up going back to school. And the next day, their principal called them into the office and was prepping to do the worst. And Kleckler handed over the forms and said, "Well, principal, don't you want to know why we skipped school? We want to join the Marines." And so Kleckler would later say, "We weren't sure if that was, we wanted to graduate early. It was more just to cover ourselves for the time being." They knew they were going, but, I'm sure they wanted to finish school up in that time. But about 3 days later, he said, the principal came up and said, "Guess what, guys? I got you guaranteed an early graduation." And so them along with 4 other classmates who we've mentioned, and then Pete Hall from the previous class, signed their forms and soon were about ready to go and fight the Axis powers. And the newspapers.com, I cannot say enough about. That is really a great resource. And I've just found, like, all the football games were recorded in there. And this was headlined in all of the newspapers down there that these 8 boys were going to join the U.S. Marines. And you can note in the article, it says entire backfield and right side of 1942 line, So they were being recognized throughout their little community. And I grew up in a small town, so I know how much community, especially a farming community, is with their local high school. And I did read that this was the first time in Weslaco history that students were granted early graduation to serve their country. So they did. This was a highlight moment for them as they got ready to go serve their country.
And another question for you, Andrew. Did any of the 8 have a Marine in their family, or was there someone in the town who was a legend? Because I think I tend to think of Texas with a strong Army and National Guard link. I think of the 36th and the 45th, and obviously the Marines draw people in from everywhere in the USA. But I'm wondering, was there a particular thing that drew them to the U.S. Marine Corps over the Army, or was it the randomness of the poster they saw? Have you any insight into that?
That's what I'm guessing, is the fancy uniforms. Them just happened to pass by the Marine Corps recruiting station. That's the best that I could find. But other than Bob Suter's brother being killed in Pearl Harbor, I don't think any of them. I mean, eventually there were a few that had siblings that joined, but up to that time, I haven't found anything that the Marines were, particular to them. But they were just very recognized for doing this. And in the articles following this one here, there was events being held. Local churches were hosting them as their guests of honor, and just it was royalty to them for sure. And then and even their mothers. This is their 8 moms here. Harlon Block's mom is in the back, second from the right. They were being photographed for all sense and purposes, like, look at what their moms are supporting their decisions and whatnot. So very heavily involved. And this picture here was of the 7 seniors for graduation day. And I apologize for the lighting, but I want you to remember January 25th as well, because that date comes into play here shortly. But they received their varsity jackets going into the graduation because they weren't going to be able to finish the school year. And it was a pretty big ceremony. And one thing I just want to take a note of, I read in one of the newspapers that they sponsored in their homerooms the day of the graduation, like a war bond and stamp contest. And their goal was about $800 for the school, but they ended up raising about $1,801.50, which in US dollars in 2023 roughly was about $32,000 for the school. So they promoted this very well. And during the graduation, they had it in the school auditorium, and all 7 were present, and the families and student body, and they looked to one of the 7 to make a speech. And as Glenn Kleckler would later say later in life, he was chosen, and he's the one right in the middle there. His comment was, "Wherever we go or whatever we may be doing, we will never forget this day." And so it meant a lot to the boys as they got ready to go overseas. And so, as you are well aware, with competition, crosstown rivals, and about all this headline and pomp and circumstance with these 8 guys, the crosstown rival boys wanted to go too. So if you'll notice in this picture, there's 13 guys, 5 other Valley rivals joined them and in the Marines, and evidently were sworn in, inducted in San Antonio, Texas on February 18, 1943, at the recruiting office in San Antonio. Harlon Block is 4th from the right, and he's next to Kleckler and Sims. And then after this, they took off. They went by Pullman train to the recruit depot in San Diego, California, where they trained for 7 weeks. And this is their platoon after graduation, platoon 154. Harlon Block is in the 2nd row, 3rd from the left. I've been able to find 7 of the 8. One of them I haven't yet to find in the picture, but they're all here, and they conducted really well, especially at the rifle range. And one of them in particular was Carl Sims. He was the only one to score an expert 307 score. So he did the best with that. And then Saving Private Ryan talks about, friends and brothers and that splitting up after boot camp. And so when these guys were thrown into the boot camp, they thought, okay, we're all going to be together. Well, as we know, that's not what happens. So all 8 split up and go their separate ways. And so
because that concept, we've talked about it at World War II TV before, going back to the Great War, whether or not to keep brothers, to keep people from the same classes and streets together. Because obviously there's on the one side, you have the benefit of camaraderie and shared experience and wanting to look after each other. And on the other hand, you have like the Fighting Sullivan story. So all of our countries have grappled with that dilemma, and they were going back and forth over that discussion, even during World War II. So even when some people are saying, no, we'll split them up, other units, other states are saying, no, keep them together. So it's an eternal question that really hasn't ever been solved.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's the thing too, like with the Nyland brothers and Sullivan brothers, it took a lot on those communities, and the Bedford boys, on Omaha Beach. So I think with them splitting up by this time, because this is February to April of 43. And so a lot of those things hadn't quite happened yet, but the Sullivan brothers did. So, but yeah, any other questions so far before we dive
No, we're good. We're good. Keep going. It's loving it. Fantastic.
Okay. And so, as I mentioned, they all split up and went their separate ways. And we'll kind of chat a little bit about what these guys did before Iwo Jima. Glenn Kleckler joined an artillery unit, and he got shipped over right away and went to the Palmyra Islands down near Hawaii, and then served in the defense of the Marshall Islands in February of 44. Before being transferred to the 4th Marine Division. Well, he was in the 4th Division, but before Iwo Jima, he got assigned to the 1st Battalion, 14th Marines, which was an artillery unit going into Iwo Jima. Leo Ryan here, he went into a defense battalion and spent a lot of his time in Johnston Island, which is in between the Hawaiian and Marshall Islands, and he was a searchlight operator. And one thing I found, and I'll mention this too, I have not been able to interview a veteran that served with these men or these men in general, and so I relied heavily on the United States Marine Corps service records. which I thank Golden Arrow Research and World War II researcher there, Bill Beagle. Those two were able to help me with these men's service info. And so in particular, in the service record of Leo Ryan, I found out that he was exposed to about 800 million candlestick lights. And so he was temporarily blinded for a time. He wasn't, I mean, he still stayed in the service, but he was injured during one of his escapades there as a searchlight operator. And then he ended up going into Washington, and he got sent back and was able to spend the rest of his time in the continental United States. And then B.R. Guess, sorry about the font there. He was in the 2nd Marine Division and was in an engineer unit and ended up going overseas immediately as well and served on the Battle of Tarawa. And that pictured there is his Purple Heart, which was a picture sent to me by one of his children. And he was wounded. I don't know if you've read the book, and let me just double check. It's called Bones of My Grandfather by Clay Bonnyman Evans. He was a grandson of Alexander Bonnyman, who won the Medal of Honor at Tarawa. And Guess was in his unit, and Guess came into Tarawa around dinner time on the 20th and was wounded by a grenade, and then served. He did end up coming back and serving at the Battle of Saipan and Tinian and Okinawa as well. Pete Hall, he was a truck driver in the 10th Marine Regiment, also 2nd Division, and he served in the same combat as Guess did. And his unit was commended Presidential Citation in July of 44 for the Battle of Saipan for some artillery strikes that they were able to do. Harlon Block, he went into a different group and he earned his parachute wings in May of 43. And I'm sure you're familiar, but the Marines had expert units such as the Marine Raiders and the Marine Parachute Unit. And Harlan went into that, and there were Raiders and parachutists at Guadalcanal, Bougainville, you name it. And so Harlan served on Bougainville in December of 43 and January of 44. And then he got transferred home to the States, where they split those two units up and created the 5th Division. And so he transferred to Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marine Regiment of the 5th Division. And he had a 30-day furlough in Weslaco, Texas, which if you've read Flags of Our Fathers, you'll note that he had a hard time after that, and he kind of had a premonition that he was not going to make it. Again, he'd fought the Japanese and just had not a good outlook on what was about to happen. And so when he went back to Camp Pendleton, he knew it was going to be probably his last mission. And then Carl Sims was he was a radio operator for the 3rd Amphibian Tractor Battalion, a part of the 3rd Marine Division. And this is a picture sent to me by one of his children here of one of them amphibious tractors that was blown up at the Battle of Guam. And so he served on Guam and then eventually at Iwo Jima. And then Robert Suter, he was a radio operator as well. And you had Chris Hemler on. He was another guy that helped me with my research. He wrote a book called Delivering Destruction and helped tell me about the Joint Assault. Yep. The 2nd Joint Assault Signal Company, and he was wounded on Saipan. He was a part of the aviation unit calling in airstrikes. So, he was wounded, but ended up serving on Tinian and Okinawa as well. And that was also a 2nd Division unit. And then we close out with Leo Leduc. He served in the Marshall Islands, and he was an airplane mechanic. He actually went to the Great Lakes Naval Base in Chicago, Illinois, after boot camp. And then in August of 44 till August of 45, he spent time on the Marshall Islands repairing planes and seeing action over there. And so this is a picture of Glenn Kleckler and Leo Leduc on the Marshall Islands. And one thing I was able to find out was that they wrote home a lot, and so the Weslaco newspaper tracked their travels in the war. I mean, they were headline stories from beginning to end, and I was able to find at least 5 times that these guys saw each other. And this picture was roughly, like I said, about September of 44 in the Marshall Islands. But in February of 45, so we're fast forwarding a little bit, Pete Hall, B.R. Guess, and Bob Suter of the 2nd Division, along with Carl Sims of the 3rd Division, had a reunion on Saipan. And that was the most that all of them saw each other. So there was half of the 8 were on one island at the same time.
Wow.
So,
and it's just fantastic, Andrew. I mean, it would have been a cool story in some ways if the 8 had ended up in, K Company of one particular unit, but it's actually a far better story that they ended up demonstrating so many different of the skill sets within the Marine Corps. Because I think a lot of people just think Marines jump out of landing craft and Amtraks and run up beaches, but we've covered searchlight, JASCO, amphibious tractors, engineers, radio operator, wireless operator, and we've covered Marshall Islands, Guam, Saipan, Tarawa, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima. Extraordinary story. They kind of, if you were a script writer, you couldn't make that up, and then having them meet up every now and then, extraordinary story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Oh, absolutely, and thank you for having me. And so this ring here, so now we'll dive into kind of the more solemn part of the story. In preparation for Iwo Jima, as you know, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Division was preparing to invade the closest island to Japanese homeland at Iwo Jima there, and with the 2 airfields and whatnot, Iwo Jima had to be taken. And so they were prepping these 3 divisions to come in and invade. And so what happens, Harlon Block runs into his best friend, Glenn Kleckler, in Honolulu, Hawaii. And like I said, I've tried to make a timeline of when this would have happened and, just to get your facts right. And it was roughly around January 10th or January 18th that they were both in Honolulu at the same time. And they ran into each other, and Kleckler gives a really good story in his interview late in life. Apparently he met another flag raiser, Ira Hayes, the Native American there, during this time. But it was during this friendly meeting that Block pretty much told Kleckler, this is it. I'm not going to see you again. I'm going to give this ring to you with the intention that if I don't make it home, give this ring to my mother. And Harlan had seen a few of the guys at some point and, had kind of related that to them as well. And this ring here was the actual ring. It's at the Iwo Jima Museum in Harlingen, Texas. And we'll talk more about that here at the end. But Kleckler didn't believe his friend. He's like, Harlan was a very happy-go-lucky guy and got along with everybody. And you can read about that in all of the articles that the school put together, that he just had a really good personality, and now he's talking about being killed. And so it wasn't a good outlook, but he took the ring with the fact that, I'll keep it. And then when I see you again, I'll give it back. And then we land on Iwo Jima on February 1945. And there was a few other football teammates that were on the island as well, but the 3 core ones representing all 3 divisions, as we discussed. On the left, you got the 5th Division with Harlon Block, who landed on Green Beach. And then the 4th Division was Glenn Kleckler, who landed on Blue Beach 1. And then you've got Carl Sims in the 3rd Division on the right-hand side, a part of the amphibian tractor unit. And they're the 3 guys that were the running backs on the football team, and they were the 3 guys that skipped school. And so all 3 of them now are on this 8.5 square mile island fighting for their life. And all of them had a task ahead of them. But Harlan's unit specifically, their main job was to go across the island and cut Mount Suribachi, the 500+ foot extinct volcano there at the left, off from the rest of the island. And we've got to give credit to the Japanese defenders there, Tadamiki Kurabayashi. Sorry if I messed his first name up, but he had that whole island connected with intergalactic caves, and that island was prepared to the T to hold out against the American forces for as long as they could. And so Block's unit, not saying that their mission was tougher than anybody else, but they had to cut that. I mean, you don't know what's in that mountain at all. And so so from February 19 till the 22nd, their job was to cut that island off. And the 21st specifically, they lost a lot of casualties taking that island. And so the main topic of the story is the flag raisings. And on the morning of the night before, on February 22, there was discussion that if there is no major combat in the next 24 hours, we're going to send a patrol up to Mount Suribachi and, take it. And the reason why the 2nd Battalion of the 28th Marines was chosen was their proximity to the command post. And the 2nd Battalion was facing Mount Suribachi. So while I talk about this, we can just look at the map here. And so they're roughly, they're facing the mountain. And Colonel Chandler Johnson of the 2nd Battalion, had that premonition that we're going to take it. And so on the morning of the 23rd, D Company went up as about halfway up the mountain. It was about a patrol of 10 men. And then F Company went a little farther up, and they had a patrol of 4 men. And so they're like, okay, there's small action, if any. Let's do something. And so the 3rd platoon of Easy Company was assigned to go up the mountain as with a radio man, Raymond Jacobs of F Company, were sent up a 40-man patrol up the mountain to secure it. And as Colonel Chandler Johnson would later tell First Lieutenant Harold Schreier, the company XO executive officer, if you get to the top, I want you to put this flag up. And it was a smaller American flag, as historians have discussed. But they traverse their way up to the top and, get up there, and they find no enemy resistance at the beginning. And they find a pole, and one of the guys that found the pole, his name was Leo Rozick. He's a Michigan guy, so he's from my neck of the woods. But they find the pole and put the flag up. And so this is the first picture taken on Mount Suribachi, one of the first of the first flag. And there's several that Lou Lowry of Leatherneck magazine took of them attaching the flag to the pole. And I've actually had the pleasure of meeting one of the first flag raisers. He was Platoon Sergeant Boots Thomas. He's sitting here with the canteen. You can kind of see his childhood best friend. There's a great book written about their friendship on Amazon and whatnot. And so I was able to learn a little bit about Boots in my research. So that was a good little story. But after that, this is roughly about 10:30 in the morning, and crowds and cheers, they're screaming, and boats are blaring their horns and whatnot, because this is the first flag going up on Japanese homeland. And so meanwhile, while this is going on, Harlon Block and 2nd Platoon, I should have prefaced that, Harlon Block was in the 2nd Platoon under Sergeant Mike Strank, and they were patrolling around the base of the mountain and then came back. And then they were tasked, because at this time they wanted to, Colonel Chandler Johnson knew that you couldn't see the flag from most of the island. It was just a little speck. And so he suggested, let's put a larger flag up. And so he calls in 2nd Platoon Sergeant Mike Strank and hands him the flag and says, Strank, I want you to take this flag up, and I want you, when you get to the top, put it up. And so his unit was badly damaged from the 21st, and so he picked 3 men. Yep, and Stephen Foley there. We'll mention him here at the end, who just commented. But so they were assigned. Strank, along with Harlon Block and Ira Hayes and Franklin Sousley, were assigned to walk up the mountain to put this flag up. And so when they get to the top, we get this famous picture. And sorry, I know it's a little blurry too, but Joe Rosenthal took the famous photo, Associated Press photographer, and then Sergeant Bill Janoust filmed it. And so we have the film evidence as well that it was not a staged photo. And then this is the first flag coming down and the second flag going up. You can kind of see Harlan there pushing it into the ground. But Harlan there is on the right, and the flag went up, and nobody really knew what happened, and it just replaced the first one. That was all the goal was, is that, hey, we're going to replace this flag just so the Marines fighting on the northern end of the island can see it. Any questions so far, Paul, at all?
No, we're loving it. It's good.
Okay.
Just keep going. Fantastic.
Okay, great. And then this is a picture taken after the fact of the flag going up. And once again, it's a little blurry, but Harlan is here on the right, pushing into the ground. And then we've got the famous gung-ho photo. And Stephen Foley, and who commented here earlier, he helped with some of the identification of the flag raisers. And I was generously sent these pictures by him. And they show, the Marines after the famous photo was taken, or the flag went up. And there's a tough of, I remember as a kid, I would always look at this picture, and there was always a tuft of hair back behind this guy with a cap. And I'm like, I can't tell who that guy is. It's Harlon Block. And in the next picture to the right, you'll see, a guy with a helmet, and that is him as well. But a lot of the flag raisers are in this picture. You got Ira Hayes on the left, Michael Strank there with his thumbs in his pocket, utility jacket, and then Block behind there by the flag. And so as we go into the end of what we think is the end of the fight, but the Marines have to take their northern end of the island. And these maps, I forgot to mention that these maps were created for me by James Cosgrove of the Project Pass YouTube channel. And I thank James for that. Great maps that he made so we can kind of visualize what happened during this combat. And so Harlan's unit stayed around Mount Suribachi for the next few days, but by March 1st, they know that, hey, we got to go farther. This island is, every inch needs to be taken. And so the 2nd Battalion jumps off on March 1st around 9 o'clock in the morning and head north. And as they're attacking Nishi Ridge and Hill 362A, Sergeant Michael Strank is killed. And it has been said that it was possibly a friendly naval shell that got him. And he was, by all accounts, the epitome of ideal Marine. Everybody in his squad looked up to him, and from what I've learned, Harlon Block was one of them. But before jumping off, on the left of this slide here, you'll see a letter, and this letter was in the USMC service record of Harlon Block, and it's a letter written to his mother on March 1, 1945 from Iwo Jima. And it's just a few lines to let you know that I'm okay. I came through without a scratch. And then he goes, oh, yes, I saw Sims, Carl, just before we hit. And that was one of the other 8 there. So he mentions in this letter his buddy. And unfortunately, that is the last letter, to my knowledge, that he wrote, because on March 1st of 1945, Harlon Block is killed in action. And there are many different discussions on how he was killed. And through my research, one of the things that I was able to find that as well in the service record, they have 2 affidavits filled out by 2 fellow Marines that were with him, apparently. And it was when they were attacking Nishi Ridge. They were about 20 yards away from Block when he was hit by fragments from an enemy artillery shell or so. And hospital apprentice or corpsman named Ralph Gillespie came and rendered first aid, and Block had succumbed by the time the corpsman got there. And so, that was, the affidavits were filled out on May 1st, so exactly 2 months after Harlon was killed in action. So I went off of that, but needless to say, he died on March 1 and was buried on Iwo Jima. And this picture here was sent to me by the Weslaco Museum of his grave on Iwo Jima. And also as well, after this is going on, Harlon's letter arrives in Weslaco, Texas to his mother. And this is around, I'm guessing, March 16th of 1945. And then by March 26th, they get the telegram. So Harlon's mother sends a letter to the Marine, sends the copy of this letter to the left, and a letter saying, this doesn't make sense. We got a letter saying that our son was killed on the, we got a telegram saying that our son was killed on the day this letter was written. There was mention that there was another Harlon Block in the unit. Is there potential that this could be wrong? And unfortunately, the Block family learned of their son and brother's passing from the Marines. And I believe that's why the affidavits were involved, was because of that incident. But it goes to show you that someone can be a Marine, a soldier, a sailor, or pilot could be writing a letter to their family on one day, and that same day they could lose their life. And so that's just the moral of combat. And the rest of these guys, they serve for the duration of the war. B.R. Guest, Pete Hall, and Robert Suter go to the occupation of Japan and Nagasaki after the atomic bombs, and they all get discharged. For example, I'll get the dates right here. They each start coming home, and their lives start to go separate ways. So Glenn Kleckler and B.R. Guest, the two on the left here, they went and played college football after school. And I had a conversation with a relative of Carl Sims on the far right, and I believe he went and played college football as well. And so 3 of these guys ended up going and playing college football after the war and going to school. And we'll dive into that here at the end of our presentation. But we've got Glenn Kleckler, B.R. Guest, Leo LeDuc, and Carl Sims. And then, of course, this picture, we'll dive into the picture just a little bit, starts even before Iwo Jima ends. Iwo Jima was a 36-day fight, and by the time the flag raising goes up, which was day 5 of the fight, like we mentioned, the battle is still going on. And that goes to show, especially when Harlon Block gets killed on March 1, 1945, there was 25 casualties in his company alone, 17 wounded in action and 8 killed in action. And so by mid-March, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of the last things that he did in office was he's like, I want these 6 guys in this picture to come home to represent a bond tour. And so they identify, they call up Rainey Gagnon, who was the company runner, to come in and identify these men. And Rainey picks 6 guys who he thinks was in this picture. And if you notice Sergeant Henry Hansen on the right from Somerville, Massachusetts, he was a member of the first flag raising. And I'll just transition really quick back to the first photo, or we'll go to the gung-ho photo. Hank Hansen is the guy in the cap, right in front of Block in that gung-ho photo. So at the time, and you can kind of tell he's got a different style to him. He's got, his pants are cuffed. The image doesn't really do it justice with my zoom, but he was, not the same as this picture here. As you can tell, this guy, his pant legs are a little longer and whatnot. But
I mean,
Hansen,
it was mentioned in this because there was the presentation with John Parshall and others from Iwo Jima yesterday that that the U.S. Marine Corps Museum has definitively identified everybody now, and it was all to do with the way trout pants were cuffed and details of boots, and it's that. We talked about it with Marty Morgan, a show, a year or so ago. It's because the photos became available in high resolution in the last decade or so.
Yes.
Suddenly now all that revision could be done, and we don't need to go necessarily into all that ongoing thing. But I loved it when they did, at the end of when they did release the definitive statement, they said, but in a sense, it doesn't matter. Everybody who was there are all part of it. That was the perfect way to say it, is to say, we have put this to bed, so to speak, but that we're arguing over details that aren't actually important. It's what the flag stands for. That is the important thing.
And that was what I was going to say next to every Marine that was involved on that island is a part of that flag raising photo. And the book Investigating Iwo, when you talk about that, the flag raising controversy, that is more that goes more into the detail there. But the reason why I mentioned Hansen is Bell Block sees this picture and instantly knows that that's Harlon, her son. And so she writes to her representative, Milton West, because she gets a letter. She gets a letter from Ira Hayes. And this letter was sent to me by Stephen Foley, who we mentioned before. And this was Ira Hayes' letter to Bell Block on, the friendship that those two had in their unit and whatnot. And it just a great story there. And then this 1947, they decide this is who is in this photo. And Harlon Block gets recognized as a flag raiser. And so around this time, and that says a fallen brother brought home, but around this time, they start sending the fallen Marines and sailors home from these Pacific islands. And Harlon Block's family requests that Harlon be brought home to Weslaco. And as we talked about before, the graduation was on January 25th, 1943. And if you notice the day here, January 23rd, 1949 was Harlon's funeral. And about 2,000 people from Weslaco and surrounding areas attended the service, and 3,000 watched the procession to Weslaco Cemetery. And who were the men that hauled him to his resting place? In the bottom left picture, his 7 best friends who he had served or he had enlisted with. And so they brought him home. They went in with him and brought him home. And that's Harlon Block's mother there, along with Franklin Sousley's mother. And I will mention, too, Franklin Sousley was also killed in action 20 days after Harlon. So 3 of the flag raisers were killed on the island. And now we'll get into the later lives here. This is a picture of 4 of the survivors at a high school graduation. You got B.R. Guest, Glenn Kleckler, Leo Ryan, and Bob Suter, and they all went their separate ways. As I mentioned before, Kleckler and Guest went in to education and played college football, and Bob Suter on the right also went into education. So they all became school teachers practically. And, went all over Texas and the country. But we'll start with Carl Sims, who's not pictured here. He was the first of the Weslaco Eight to pass away. After the war, he became a member of a barbershop quartet and actually worked in the Texas Border Patrol operation. And so he spent his time doing that. And just from all accounts, just a great gentleman. And he passed away in 1986 from complications from malaria that he had received in the Pacific Island. And then we go to Bob Suter here on the right. He became an educator and then got married and moved west. He actually taught in a bunch of different states, finally settling in Vallejo, California, where he was a member of the fire department. And then he passed away in August of 1993. Leo LeDuc has an interesting story. He actually went back into the Marines after the war and served all the way up into 1959. He was a co-pilot, airplane mechanic, and actually was a pilot for a famous government official as well, and we're still going into details on that. There was an article mentioning Wesley West, who was a famous Texan that he could have been with as well. But Leo served all over the world, and even Singapore, he was mentioned in at some point, but lived a great life and moved back to Texas, and he passed away in May of 1994. And then Pete Hall returned home from the war. He's buried at Fort Sam Houston. He died in 1999. And then B.R. Guess here on the left, he went into education as well and spent 30 years in education, where he taught physical education and earth science, and passed away in 2001. So, they all lived their lives, and kind of, as we know, they wanted to move on from the war, and but they were constantly, it seemed like every year around the anniversary of Iwo Jima, the newspapers were covering Harlon Block. These guys were all mentioned. So the story was always coming up. Look, Harlon was one of 8 guys that enlisted together. So it was just one of those things where it continued for the rest of their life. So going into that, Leo Ryan ended up becoming, he's the guy in the middle here. He ended up becoming a sports official he was a president of the Valley Football and Basketball Sports Officials Association, and then was even postmaster for Weslaco going in his later life. And he was a Marine as well after the war. He served a few more years in the Marine Corps Reserve down in Texas. So 2 of the guys stayed in the service after, which is very cool. And then we get to Glenn Kleckler, who here he is pictured with his grandson. Harlon Block, I will note, Harlon Block was reburied again in 1995 for the 50th anniversary of Iwo Jima. He was reburied in Harlingen, Texas, which is about 20 minutes to half an hour east of Weslaco. And he is buried on the grounds of the Marine Military Academy, where the original die cast of the Arlington Memorial, the Marine Corps Memorial, is there. So Felix de Walden's original die cast is on the grounds of this, and Harlon Block is buried near that. And so this is Kleckler at the grounds of his buddy's grave. And he tried to return the ring to Harlan's mother after the war, and she suggested that he keep it. And so Glenn Kleckler, like the rest of these other 7, he lived a phenomenal life, and was able to, he was a very large part of his community. He stayed in the Harlingen area. He was a educator, assistant principal, and just all around, just hear great things about him, and taught driver's ed, and ultimately kept this ring on his finger the rest of his life. And so he finally donated it to the Iwo Jima Museum on the grounds of the Marine Military Academy in 2009, 2010. But he wore it, raising a family, being an educator, and just that was a part of him. And so just a great story. And he was the last one to pass away on October 6th of 2016. And, that was the last of an era. As we know, a lot of our World War II veterans are passing away, and their stories are, a lot of them, haven't been told yet. And so what I really, in closing, what I really like about this story is that it kind of relates to, I wasn't a Marine. I'm not, but I wanted to serve my country. But the Semper Fi motto for the Marines relates to these guys, because they're always faithful, and these guys were faithful to each other from beginning till end. And 6 years after enlisting, they brought their buddy home, he was sent home and buried there, and they brought him to a resting place. But and Kleckler for the rest of his life talked about his friend. And so just a phenomenal story. And this was a picture I had the opportunity to visit. My cousin lived down there for a while in the area, and so I, along with my aunt, got to visit, and I took this picture at Harlan's grave site. And then as we talked about 2016, this is the final 2016 to 2019. This is what the final flag raising photo his lineup has went to be. And I've gotten to know some of the guys that were involved with that. And so just a very good friendship, who have shared their research with me and my project. And this is my cousin Logan and I at the statue there. And I just want to thank you and your listeners for having me today for the 80th anniversary of the famous flag raising event, and the opportunity to talk about what I hope will be a book someday. I've been working on it for the last few years, but it takes time. So
it does. Well, I mean, it's brilliant stuff, Andrew. And there was a couple of comments in the sidebar earlier about that, how frequent that premonition of death did mean that someone died. It's like the cliche in the war movies: if someone picks up and reads a letter from home, they're going to die in the next scene. Those tropes you see in the war movies. And yeah, I think every unit I've ever read about, there's always that seems to be that guy who has that premonition, and it does seem to come true. And I have no, as someone said, who was it who said it? You can't explain it. It's just, but it happens too often. As Roderick said, if I can work my mouse, here we go. Premonition of death, common yet unexplainable. I mean, and yet, as you said there as well, interesting as that as well, is that he gave the ring to the guy who then lived the longest of the 8. That's a weird coincidence as well, is that Harlan then died pretty much immediately after giving the ring, almost. And then the guy he gave it to lived another, whatever, my maths is terrible, whatever it was, 70 something years. That's just interesting. I mean, I have no explanation. It's just interesting. Yeah,
and it's just, because like I mentioned too, I love studying military history and also the football end of things as well. I played football in high school, and just I had some friends in school that we were all kind of like that, and I know that we still talk to each other every day, and it's there. So it's a good story.
Since you were 12. Is David England a friend of yours? Is he?
Yes, he is. Yep, I grew up with David. I appreciate it. It's a good story, and a lot of people that you've had on your channel as well. I've shared it as well, and one of them who I want to thank, Dr. Jared Frederick. I've emailed him a lot, just kind of piggybacking on him. What should I do with this? And so it's been a great thing, and just being able to speak to people about this book, I've really enjoyed it. So I can't thank you enough for having me.
Fantastic. And Jared's a great guy and a great friend. And Andrew, we've been discussing doing this show for, it must be 6 months or more that you first contacted me. So it's finally come around, and it's been fantastic. So, folks, apologies for not putting many comments up on screen. My mouse is playing up. I don't know what's up with it. I'm now not doing anything the next 2 days. Back again on Wednesday, all being well. As always, don't forget to check out my guest websites, buy my guests' books, consider becoming a patron of the channel or a YouTube channel member, and always click like and subscribe and share what we're doing. But Andrew, fantastic debut performance. When you get the book out, if I can help in any way with publishers in the meantime, let me know. But when you do get the book out, come back on and let us know any updates, because it's a compelling story, and it's been fantastic talking to you. So thanks very much.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me.
So that's it then. I'll see you all on Wednesday then, folks. Cheers then. Bye.